Great. I just wanted to welcome you all to Feminists Confronting the Far Right, Obstructing Their Agendas and Advancing Our Visions. My name is Naureen Shameem. I'm the founder of Noor, a new feminist initiative, and I'll be moderating the session with a set of amazing speakers. And I want to extend a huge thanks to our amazing panelists and to you all. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Just a few opening comments. I wanted to speak to why we're holding this event, why we're here together, and looking at perhaps some of the overall themes and the context in which we're operating and bringing forward this discussion. So we see this as a moment of opportunity in crisis, right? A moment both of multiple and intersecting crises, and at the same time, an opportunity to deeply reimagine our world. In terms of the context, we see processes of ongoing de-democratization with authoritarian and neo-fascist movements increasingly prevalent and powerful across contexts. As many of us know, more than 50% of the world population is now governed under authoritarian regimes. Many of these movements, parties, and regimes have also taken advantage of the pandemic and economic crisis to consolidate deeper authoritarianism. Some common elements just wanted to bring forward as well in terms of the context of the rising right in many countries. Firstly, just emphasize the role of corporate power in the ways that neoliberalism is acting to hollow out democracy, the ways in which severe inequality breeds hardship and resentment as part of this overall context and picture. Secondly, a key factor is the rise of ethno-nationalist movements and parties who define the nation in racist and other exclusionary ways. Thirdly, a key piece is spiraling processes of securitization that we're seeing. So war on migration, the use of security and counterterrorism powers, surveillance. And then lastly, and also emphasizing the interconnections between these different modes, fundamentalist movements and or theocratic religious movements that are on the rise, and which constitute often a mass base for regressive governance and ideas around gender, sexuality, and are deeply hierarchical. And all of these elements, through silencing and repression, a key piece is in terms of feminist and progressive organizing that they aim to undermine feminist and progressive organizing, that they seek to clamp down and undermine our work as movements. Further, I wanted to emphasize that the success of the far right is very much furthered by their vision of society. There's an ideology, as many of us know, of fear, of exclusion and discrimination, evocations of religion, culture, and tradition, in the language of life, family, and tradition as key themes, or that they package in co-opted anti-globalization rhetoric, right? So channeling the discontent from the negative impact of neoliberal globalization on people's living conditions into support for an entirely different agenda. On the other hand, and that's partly why we're here today, is what is the role of feminist movements, right? And it's really central, and that's one of the things just wanted to emphasize. So gender justice is at the root of these phenomena, right? Authoritarianism, fundamentalisms, and fascisms, conceptions of the modern nation state and nationalism as well, are rooted in heteropatriarchy, right? And thus, gender and sexuality are central to their ideologies. Feminist organizing as such, as many of us know, is a leading force for liberation, right? So feminist movements across regions are at the forefront in identifying and analyzing warning signs of fundamentalisms and fascisms, and also at the forefront in terms of innovative ground-up community-based forms of organizing, right? Both to challenge and to move forward. And as such, also developing and growing transformative systemic alternatives, for instance, in direct democracy and radical forms of democracy, where democracy is obviously at the heart of a lot of the impact that we've been talking about. A couple of things that are missing or that we can perhaps build on, and this could be part of our discussion today as well, is keeping in mind that despite its anti-globalist rhetoric, to a significant extent, the rising right organizes transnationally, right? And so seeing what we can do in terms of addressing gaps about limited transnational connection and coordination, about the sharing of tactics and collective action amongst those feminist and progressive movements. We're building strong anti-fascist and fundamentalist movements locally. And secondly, There is also often limited exchange and coordination between those activists, collectives, networks, and movements working to advance transformative alternatives, feminist realities, with those who are, in the trenches, so to speak, with tactical knowledge of the far right and rising right. And so, just to introduce a new feminist initiative, Noor, one of its ideas is to try to address some of these gaps. It is a global feminist and movement-driven think and do tank, informed by deep knowledge of far-right organizing. And it seeks to do this by, firstly, building transnational networks to sustain and deepen an internationalist response to the rising far-right. Secondly, by building narrative power. And thirdly, by facilitating strategic convenings in order to bring transformative alternatives to fundamentalisms, fascisms, neocolonialism, and capitalism into reality. So just to think about the fact that the rising right, one of the functions is to prevent us from reaching our visions, our feminist visions of systemic change, right? And the idea of building an initiative that aims to thus address the roadblocks to achieving our visions of thriving, of social justice and human rights, and aiming to build our power together and developing long-term strategy together in order to advance transformative alternatives. So today we're looking to create a conversation on the work of feminist movements to disrupt and challenge the rising right in multiple regions worldwide, on transnational solidarity and network building, and also on how we can collectively address the roadblocks to achieving our transformative visions. So joining us, as I mentioned, are our amazing speakers, who I will now introduce. Firstly, Nana Abuelsoud. Nana is the programmatic and advocacy lead in research, a transnational South-led feminist alliance of younger feminists. She's a feminist researcher based in Cairo, motivated by her interest in knowledge production and feminist movement building. Previously, she worked as a sexual and reproductive rights researcher at the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, EIPR, and was a core member of Ikhtiyar Feminist Collective between 2016 and 2020. Nana is a fellow of the Transformative Research Arab Families Working Group as well. Welcome, Nana. And we have as well with us Fahima Hashim. Fahima Hashim founded and served as a director for Salma Women's Resource Center in Khartoum before it was forced closed by the Sudan government. A feminist activist for over 25 years, dedicated to promoting radical change for women and their place in society, she has a focus on feminist movement building, action research, and training. Currently, Fahima works for the Noble Women's Initiative to organize a series of international events highlighting the crucial role played by women human rights defenders in the MENA region. She is a board member of Nazar for Feminist Studies and an advisory board member for the Doria Feminist Fund, the first feminist fund for women in the MENA region. In addition, she's mentoring two young feminist groups as part of the Sister to Sister program organized by NWI. Welcome, Fahima. And last but not least, we have Cristina Palabay. And Cristina Palabay is the Secretary General of the Karapatan Alliance, a national alliance working for the promotion and protection of human rights in the Philippines. She serves as the Alliance's spokesperson, oversees its day-to-day work, and leads it in advocacy efforts in the enactment of laws on human rights, including those against torture and enforced disappearances, and for the protection of human rights defenders and the indemnification of victims during Marcos's martial law. She is recognized as amongst the recipients of the 2019 Women Have Wings Courage Awards and is also a regional council member of APWLD, a feminist regional platform of more than 200 grassroots women's organizations in the Asia-Pacific region. She also serves as a country advisor to the Urgent Action Fund for Women's Rights Asia-Pacific, a member of the advisory group of the ECRNet, and Karapatan's representative to the Global Coordinating Committee formed by Frontline Defenders on attacks against human rights defenders. Through her years as an activist, like many of her colleagues at Karapatan, Cristina has faced death and rape threats, surveillance, and judicial harassment because of her staunch defense of women's rights and people's rights. But she continues to do her work as a human rights defender. Thank you for joining us too, Tina. And so we'd like to start a conversation. If I can pose to you all the question, in the context of fundamentalisms, fascism, and authoritarianism, what is the situation on the ground for feminist activists, women and girls in your area of organizing? Anna, did you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you so much, Naureen, for the amazing introduction and for the invitation. So I'll try to give snippets of in response to what you just posed. What is the situation on the ground? And I think authoritarian regimes have been very strategic in closing spaces and strengthening and sharing strategies transnationally and to intentionally attack human rights from diverse fronts and restrict organizational capacities and mobilization for civil society. And really, I would just say any kind of organizing, not just feminist organizing. This is clear in shrinking public spaces in many countries and weakened civil society participation in international policy spaces. And I would like to make the case of how the increased political polarization we're witnessing where we live and work is echoed forcefully in women and feminist organizing spaces as well. And this has to be looked at and examined as part of a whole and not solely an attack on women's rights and organizing. Because such a polarization hits harsher the people live in or actually pushed to live on the social, political, and economic margins. And I'll just try to give examples of how this translates into daily, encounters for everyone. And I will just rely on a report that we worked on in research together with the Feminists in Latin America. And this report was basically just to look at how the pandemic heightened authoritarian power and policing of communities and societies across regions. And I'll just give a set of examples of like what we came across. So like, for example, we would see people getting killed by the police for not adhering to COVID precautionary measures in Angola, or how in Bolivia, the de facto government took a chance at COVID by persecuting its opponents. And in Chile, women getting arrested for breaching COVID restrictive mobility measures on their way to the police to report domestic violence. And the last two examples from Syria and Egypt, having in some parts of Syria, doctors and health providers not allowed to have their phones on the sites of service as an attempt by authorities to ban documentation of lack in protective gear or widely failing infrastructure in the face of the pandemic. And in Egypt, we've seen the persecution of doctors who made public announcements on Facebook, for example, last year, about the major challenges they face because of lack in protective gear. And I'm not trying to make this about COVID or say all of this is because of COVID, but I'm just giving these examples are to show how COVID highlighted the authoritarian regimes we're living under and how fragile our communities are. It is also to talk about how a global public health crisis translated into having the military lead national COVID task forces, how a crisis that requires expertise, for example, from the media and health sectors to calm down collective panic right at the start of the pandemic, were absolutely missing from the scene and replaced by arms and guns. So we call this pattern that we've came across in that report as political opportunism. And when I was working in this report, I thought of political opportunism in two ways. Of like, one way is the one that I just shared, like how authorities are using a public health crisis to, gain more power. But I've also thought of it as our own political opportunity, as you just said in the introduction, of like, how can this be an opportunity and just like a big slap on the face all at once, right? So, and just to refer back to how authoritative regimes use political opportunism to face COVID, like how they managed those in power to get people to turn into informants on each other, like in Europe, for example. Like if you see someone breaching COVID measures, just like call the police on them. And this has become very normalized, I would say, and people feeling like they're protecting it themselves by just calling police on each other. and how all the subsequent authoritative responses to citizen reports on COVID violations embodied what feels like an orchestrated attack, I would say, on data and privacy, on women, on LGBTQI communities, sex workers, and really basically anyone who's poor. So we have to think about this and keep a note of it, while we are also cognizant of the fact that authoritarianism and fundamentalism build their basis on fear and the ambiguity of the future. So for feminist organizing, this global public health crisis resulted in multiplying our fronts, I would say. And to give an example of like some of the issues that feminist organizing, the women rights mobilization have faced because of that, would be the diversion of some of the fundings, because like what those groups have been working on seem to be irrelevant to the sense of urgency and crisis that we're living under. And it becomes much more difficult to work within communities when that heightened sense of survival is, got provoked last like spring of 2020, because now people are struggling to make ends meet. So like the analyses that we've been trying to build together or alone over the past few years, I like looking back at it now, I don't think it is accommodating to all of the it's not accommodating the sense of survival of like majority of our communities. Those people are struggling again to, as I said, to make ends meet. So like we have to be able to, and maybe I'll touch on this later, like later on in the conversation, we'll have to be very cognizant of the kind of stressors and the kind of urgency that our communities are facing, but at the same time be aware of how this sense of urgency and the sense of survival is making it much easier for authoritative regimes to gain more control and power over those communities. So like, just to answer your question, what is the situation? I would say, in short, really, it's multiplied fronts for us to tend to less resources and a collective survival urge, despite the fact that the world is acting business as usual. I hope I've answered your question.
Absolutely, no. Thank you so much. And for speaking in terms of how that heightened sense of urgency you're speaking to can exacerbate those sense of authoritarian control. I wanted to ask you too, Fahima, if I could check, what is your take on this in terms of fundamentalisms, fascisms, and authoritarianism, what you see as the situation on the ground for feminist activists, women and girls? I think you're on mute right now, Fahima.
Oh, okay.
It's fine. No worries.
Yeah. So I will repeat again. Just thank you so much, Naureen, for this opportunity. It's really great, and I'm really honored to be here today. When Nana was talking, it's really reflected a lot of flashback on what I mean. The 30 years we lived with the fundamentalist government in Sudan, for example, is more vivid for me to speak about. Despite the fact that we as women and feminists, we were actually the only group at certain time, like for almost 10 years, we are the only group who were confronting the government, because the government, what they did, actually, they legalized everything that controls over women's mobility and sexuality and women's existence in public spaces. And these actually reflected so much into how much resistance we had to make in order to create, open up windows for ourselves in order to be existing on those spaces. And that was the situation before the revolution that took place in 2018. And the situation now, for example, our famous public order law, which was controlling women dress, controlling women mobility, controlling women in public spaces. It was actually not reform, but it should be as like taken away, no more public order. But in reality, that's not the case. Still, women get faced with a lot of violence in public spaces. Actually, they are, if they are wearing, like, openly wearing trousers and trying to feel free in these public spaces, they are still facing all this. And I think it's not only the fundamentalism, fascism, totalitarianism that we lived that made this continue, but it's also, there's a huge rise of patriarchy against feminists, against women in many ways. And I see the situation now with, during COVID, for example, it was a space where a lot of issues regarding violence against women came out. Like, even not only domestic violence, it's also killing of young girls who resist their families. I mean, there are so many cases that raised in early 2021, this year. I think we had like 7 girls in different parts of Sudan who were killed by their brothers or fathers because of them want to continue education, want to go to their friends. It's so many, like, it's very simple. But that, for me, it's more the core now is not, we are not resisting only the situation where we are talking about, yeah, the government, it should be a civic government, it should be more democratic government. Unfortunately, that's not the case because of militarism, militarism that is actually taking the scene now, with the army, with the militias, with all those groups are controlling the public spaces. And I think this for me is like, people are saying that, what did we do? Did we change the previous regime to another authoritative regime, or we are it's really complicated. And with COVID, it became even more complicated, with economic crisis rising, with huge problems of no yet until now legal system hasn't changed. The same laws are implemented until today, and the women's movement is just scattered. This one of the problem is that I think we need to come together under one umbrella, and I feel like building women's solidarity is the core now. It's not the case of Sudan, that actually is not a unique in compared to the Middle East and North African countries who are living similar or even more worse situation in countries like in conflict, like Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, who are still facing all these contexts. Like, even now in all, even post-revolution, I mean, if you talk about, and I think it's still not finished, the revolution that we started in 2011 or late 2010 by the Tunisian revolution. I think we haven't yet finished that revolution, and this revolution get captured quickly by the authoritative, by the military, by the patriarchal rising that we are living. And I mean, here strategizing in order to look at this is, again, we need to rebuild our solidarity. And I think one of the main things that I want to mention here, not only our local solidarity, is also transnational solidarity. One of the main things that helped us during the 30 years of the Bashir regime was basically our connection with the transnational movement, learning new tactics, new strategies, learning new ways of working, and how to I mean, like what I used to call it, bend to the wind. That sometimes when they are really heightened to control over civil society, closing public spaces, we go down with that, and then we see gradually how could we come out and what issues can we bring in order to make it a soft landing, rather than just bringing big issues that the government will again slap us in the face. So it's actually a lot of learning, a lot of stress, a lot of mental health issues that comes into this. A lot of women get burned out and just go back and they don't want to work anymore. So there are so many issues that affected feminist movement in the MENA region that needs a lot of work and a lot of solidarity at the transnational level. And the final thing that I want to say, this issue of rise of patriarchy is something that need to really revise and really build more tactics. Getting more freedom, you get more violence. And that is where, when we get more violence because we are raising our voices and we are raising our agendas and we are building our solidarity, we need to also be aware that these things that we are gaining and these success stories and narratives that we are building are not going to go without resistance from the other side. So the rise of patriarchy also need a lot of strategies, a lot of tactics, and that cannot be done without building our solidarity at the regional and transnational level. So I feel like the situation is still very complicated, and I think when I first looked at the initiative of Noor, I think it was like, oh, this is what we had lost in the last decades. We needed to have an umbrella that brings us all who are facing this context in order to strategize. Not only, make people aware is one side, building knowledge is another side, but solidarity is something that we really need to build in order to compile, all the things that I spoke about. And yeah, I think we are in the right track in order to go into these things. And I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, Fahima. Thank you so much. And for emphasizing, how solidarity is at the core, how building women's solidarity is at the core of this, and the need for us to sort of counter-strategize, develop counter tactics in the face of resistance. Tina, I wanted to ask you too about your take in terms of the context of the rising right. What do you see as a situation on the ground for women, girls, and feminist activists and movements?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the lowdown on the Philippines. The map consists of actors like really an authoritarian government, that can you hear me? Okay. I hope you can hear. Okay, yes. You can hear me now. Okay, that advocates for a strongman approach in each and every step of the way, from the president down to the police or a village official. You have big business and land or both those in the government and who promote business practices that are not good for human rights or for women. You have educational institutions, you have schools, who haven't institutionalized gender and human rights education, and you have the media, including big tech, and how it has occupied a space. Technology, meaning social media, has occupied a space in terms of channels of communication and information by the people. And then you have structures, in all of these spaces, in all of these actors, they promote feudal and patriarchal culture, and ways. These actors drive the narratives that are there. They seed meta narratives against facts. They seed meta narratives on the opposition, the critics, human rights defenders, dissenters, who, by the way, are mostly women, leaders. Now you have the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Ressa. There are opposition leaders. Most of them are women leaders, and these meta narratives are characterized by promotion of lies, told 1,000 times, that it has been spurred as like the truth, by the trolls and everything on social media, you have sexist and misogynist language, which is a throwback to the many progressive laws that we have on women. You have hate speech and threats inciting harm and violence against women, death and rape threats all over. And the tactics are very complicated and yet have somewhat a simple objective. That is to discredit women human rights defenders and to pound on the spirits of women human rights defenders. And we feel this, in online spaces. There are smears, red tagging, as they call it, cyber attacks, using government funds. You have pro-government bloggers who demean the credibility and call names or put labels on mostly women human rights defenders who are outspoken under this administration. And then you have offline attacks, and these attacks are really very dangerous because this has created the climate or completed the circle of the climate of fear and impunity in the country through extrajudicial killings. If you get branded like a drug, like being a drug user, or as a communist sympathizer, or as a loud woman critic, it means almost death, because that's what they threaten you on social media. That's what happens in the streets. And the major impacts are really very dire. It's really a backsliding of democracy. You have the climate of impunity. You have domestic accountability mechanisms all off, meaning almost nil delivery of justice. And then you have checks and balance in the system that are not really checks and balance because it's mostly balanced on the prevalent, whoever is in power, and that means a more dangerous atmosphere and environment for women human rights defenders. And it's strengthening, we feel it, it is strengthening the patriarchal structures that we have slowly broken down, the past years. The women's movement here in the Philippines have broken down in the past year. So the point is, this is one of the dangerous times. I mean, I'm only 42, but I think this is one of the dangerous times for women in general here in the Philippines. And I know this is true also in many other contexts all over the world, because this is a time when you're a woman who speaks her mind and her thoughts on various issues, any issue actually for that matter, as long as it's on women's rights and human rights. There's a consequence, a dire consequence that you'll face, and that what makes it more long-lasting, more dangerous, and a more insidious actually, impacts on democracy, on the exercise of women's rights, and what they call it, it's in the movement building. Of course, it has impacts on how we strengthen, how we build the movement that we have right now.
Thank you so much, Tine. No, I think in terms of the way you frame it as being about a sliding of democracies and the ways in which, a key focus is to discredit and silence human rights defenders, including women human rights defenders. I also wanted to, I think that's key. And I also wanted to, please, anyone I have seen in the chat, any thoughts that you have, please do continue to share. Seeing a comment in terms of sexuality baiting also having been used to refer to those kinds of smear efforts to attack credibility in the past. I'd also like to ask you all a second question. The ideologies and tactics of the rising right, as we've been talking about, as you've highlighted, are rooted in patriarchy and heteronormativity. So if we can pick up on some of the threads that I think have already started to emerge, I wonder if you could speak in terms of how feminist movements are challenging authoritarianisms and fundamentalisms. And Tine, I'll go back to you first, if that's okay.
Well, how has it been with us, no, in challenging authoritarianism and fundamentalisms? Well, we of course we go to the basics, to the organizing, no? But at the same time, we have been very, open, and we have had several experiences in many creative ways of organizing. One way is, of course, one is on the mutual aid initiatives that we have conducted in the Philippines. As they said, it started with a girl, no, who started mounting a community pantry in a street here in Metro Manila, and then a few days after that, there are like 1,000 community pantries all over the country with direct, critiques on why is the government not doing anything to give food to the people during the lockdowns. No, that's why there's a need for community action, for citizen action. So deep dive discussions, of course, are we see very important, because we see the internet. You have 140 words, right? You have 240 characters on Twitter. These are good platforms to jump off the discussions, no? But you need deep dive discussions in order to distill ideas and to learn from and have that interaction, that really dynamic interaction. At the same time, there are many various organizations which are being formed. As I said, even the groups, what they call K-pop groups. I'm sorry if that would seem not familiar with others, but K-pop groups or young women K-pop fans are organizing young feminist groups in the various communities or girl groups. That's energizing for me, because I came from the youth movement. And when I see girls 18, 19, 20 years old doing their thing, in organizing various collectives or groups, then it gives someone hope, right? It gives us much hope that the learnings that we have been doing are there's continuity in the movement. Of course, awareness raising is being continued online and offline, more so online right now, but really very dangerous spaces online. Protest in the streets, though difficult because of the restrictions, we continue doing that. And I think we have several learnings on coalition building. Doesn't mean that we have to agree all the time, but it means that we have to build on what we have on common grounds. And I think that makes a lot of difference in confronting authoritarian big behemoths like big tech companies, or big government figures like ours. We have the president himself promoting these kinds of authoritarian ways and values.
Thank you so much, Tina. Yeah, no, I think in terms of what you're speaking to in terms of young feminist organizing, and then especially as you're emphasizing the importance of coalition building and common fronts, right? Not necessarily agreeing on everything as you mentioned, but building that base seems really key. I wanted to ask you too, Fahima, what you see in terms of some of the ways that how feminist movements are challenging authoritarianism and fundamentalism in the rise of the right.
I think for me, I just build on Tanya's points on the rising of the young feminist movement that is really giving us like carrying the torch, continuing. But that is not easy, because there is, for example, I feel like there are so many challenges facing those young feminists, and how could we make that like as a chain and continue to connect with them back and forth. I remember there was a meeting in 2019, and this meeting brought different generations talking about how could we build a women agenda for Sudan post-revolution. And the young generation brought issues like save abortion, brought issues like support women with sexual identity. Whatever these issues were never part of the agenda of the women's movement historically. And those women were like hushed by the different, women groups saying, please, this is not the issue for us today. But how could we see our issue and their issue? Why do we need to see the issue as an issue that takes everybody's concern instead of dividing ourselves because they're talking about something we don't know? We need to learn. And I think this is one of the challenges facing different generational in order, I don't want to say the word gatekeepers, but I want to say that we can't just tell them that you don't know, we know best. And I think this is one of the things that is really facing the younger. I remember one of the things that happened again, young women led the revolution, really. Some of them died during the revolution. Some of them were imprisoned during the revolution, and they were courageous enough. And like this photo of this young girl that she was arrested, she was released, she went back, they broke her hand, she put the blaster, she went back, they shaved her hair, she went back, and she said, I'm not going to give up. And I think this is an example where we really need to learn how could we let those we strengthen our solidarity in order to let them face those problems and on. The Women March that took place last April in the streets of Khartoum. And here I see the rise of patriarchy again. Like, it was a peaceful march, women for the first time bringing an agenda led by the young women, bringing all issues that connect women from different parts of the country. What happened to that is that public people on the street were just getting in with their cars, hitting the girls. And those are not necessarily the security or the police or government people. These are just the public who just doesn't want those young women or women voices to be heard. And then when they made a case and they went to the police to make a case for the guy who hit like 4 women, the case is still in court. We're talking about April, and it's still in court. There's no justice found. So the system, the police system, and there's still a lot of difficulties for women accessing justice. Yeah, the laws haven't changed. Whatever the calls they made for that, there's still like men who are doing those laws, especially the personal law. And again, any voice that comes from young women, and especially when you call yourself a feminist, then you are even faced with more lashback and misogyny and so much stress that put on those young women, especially in social media. And there's a lot of hate language and misogyny that's coming out. And even now they are trying to build on analyzing these hate speeches that's coming on the social media. Some of the young women are trying to see how could they look at this as another platform of a patriarchy, another platform where they can resist. Because social media is wide, where you block you block yourself from the Facebook, you go to Twitter, somebody else will follow you. So it is very challenging. And I think this is still, for me, the hope of the rise of the young feminists is actually what we need to build on. Not in terms of telling them they don't know, we need to teach them, but to learn from them, because they also create different new methodology and strategies from where they have learned, where they have in the social media. For me, I still get challenged, but for them, it is just like a piece of cake. So how could we build this? And now so many strong platforms are in the social media. And this is, I think, the platform for the young women they are using mostly, even in countries where internet is problematic and controlled. So I think it is a hope, and it is a new way that we build our solidarity in order to look at how could we connect them not only regionally or locally, but transnationally, because like for them, Sudan was blocked for 30 years. And now to come to the national, platform, they need a lot of skills building. And I think this is one of the areas that where training and knowledge building can really contribute to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fahima. Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of, it really highlighted to me what you're speaking about, the power and resilience of young feminist movements, and then also everything that is coming out of these opportunities for intergenerational learning in terms of how we're responding. I wanted to go to you next, Nana, just to ask you in terms of looking at the ideologies and tactics of the rising right, how do you feel, what are some ways in which you think feminist movements are challenging authoritarianism and fundamentalism?
Thank you. First, I just want to actually highlight what Tanay has just shared earlier in terms of like talking more, like working with everyone and not having to agree with like to have this political agreement at all time. I really I can't stress this enough. I think this is one of the major takeaways from, like, for me personally, when thinking of what to steal from the right mobilization. It is startling how fundamentalists have been able to keep their messaging clear, plain, and simple, and really talking to anyone and everyone, which is something that I don't think we do enough of as feminists. And in feminist organizing spaces, we get caught up in different different things, I would say. But to answer your question, so like I would just share a couple of things that we've been doing in research. So we've been building our analyses in what we call lived realities thought leadership. We have two thought leadership streams, and one of them is our lived realities. And what we try to do through this one is basically look at all the challenges that people come across and get overlooked in numeric insights and quantitative reports, whether it's a national, international, or regional, like for us. And for example, we know like I'll just give an example of how we look at this. So like we look at the access to quality reproductive health services. This doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So like it is linked to economic schemes, quality education, unrestricted access to information. So we know it is connected to also environmental and ecological conditions and crises that we live under and within. So we take these analyses and the sexual and reproductive justice framework that we built over the years to dig deeper and actually expand it with other younger feminists in cross-regional dialogues that we hold every now and then. And we also do this in cross-movement organizing spaces. So this is how we get to deepen our collective analyses and have more insights of what are the real challenges and how to make interlinkages across movement. And we take those analyses to make links between the local, regional, and international agendas and spaces. And I think one of the reasons that we do this very deliberately is that we've seen how authoritarian regimes and fundamentalists are quite intersectional, comprehensive in their attacks. And I don't think the majority, like this is my personal opinion, I don't think that the majority of feminist organizing spaces that I'm familiar with have as similar intersectional, comprehensive approaches in addressing those violations. So that's why we work in bolstering those interlinkages between sexual and reproductive justice and economic and environmental justice. We've also, the other thought leadership stream that we work through is what we call beyond criminalization. And through which this stream, we work on it to challenge privileged institutions who use the system to further disenfranchise those already at the margins. And we work on, like, we address the over-criminalization and criminalization in general in cross-movement alliances across social, economic, and ecological justice, with diverse leadership that best reflects our world. So economic, racial, ecological, generational. And we do this also from vertical to horizontal. So like we try to break the silos by speaking to everyone and with everyone. I'll try to get there. Yeah. And one of the concrete examples that I'd like to give is our work with the Feminists in Latin America and Balance in Mexico. We worked together on a campaign called the Injusta Justicia, which is Unjust Justices. And it looks at the shortfalls of criminalization and punitive measures that we as feminists as well keep on making the case for, like putting it in our political asks to ask for more laws to combat sexual violence or domestic violence and so on and so forth. So like I'll try to keep it short, but like those are the two main streams that we try to thought leadership streams that through which we try as a young South-led feminist alliance to challenge patriarchy and heteronormativity. Big questions, Naureen. You're asking big questions.
Thanks, Nana. Very true. And I appreciate everything you said. I mean, in terms of just emphasizing as well the need of looking at pathways beyond criminalization, and then what you emphasized too in terms of our approaches being intersectional in ways that the rising rights approaches are often ironically intersectional and coming from a lens of sexual and reproductive justice, as well as economic and environmental justice, and then our approach as movements. A last question for you all as well, if I can ask. And also just in terms of the chat box, anything that anyone wants to share in terms of interventions and comments, just always really welcome. So for the three of you, wondering how can transnational network building, solidarity, and collective action support us to address these roadblocks we've been discussing? How can it support us to address these roadblocks we face to achieving our transformative visions? I wonder, Fahima, if you'd be happy to kick us off on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think for me, I just want to tell about an experience that we had in 2008 with Shirkat Guy in Pakistan, which was through Women Living Under Muslim Laws network. And at that time where rape became a weapon of war in Sudan, and we had a law that really doesn't even define what rape means in the law. If you are raped and you made a case, that means that you've committed and confirmed that you've committed adultery. So that controversial situation, we were lost. And I think one of the things that when we came back to the Women Living Under Muslim Laws, we learned about the experience of the Pakistani women changing and reforming the Hudud law at that time, which is so similar to the experience we had. We went to Lahore to learn the experience. They connected us with every single woman who had participated in that. So it was like really a learning process. As also that how could we, then when we went there, it's the funny part of it is that I said, how long did you take to change the law? They said 27 years. And I was like, oh my God, are we gonna live this years to change the law in Sudan? I was like, I even saw our situation more complicated. But I tell you what, we took 7 years to change the law. Yet, throughout these 7 years, the experience we got from not only Shirkat, women in Iran, women in different parts of the world, I think that was the most enriching for us, not as Sudanese women who came together under one umbrella, and even strengthened when we saw the alliance building, how women came together under one umbrella to work for one cause that was so powerful. And I think that even gave us, like, it was a lesson for us. So we were 11 organizations under one umbrella to change that law. So I think it was one of the few experiences that we had in order to make that happen. So international solidarity, transnational solidarity, whatever we call it, I think it is crucial. It's crucial looking at the work that is being done by women living in the Muslim laws, Musawa, Awid, so many other groups in Southeast Asia, in even some groups who are facing fundamentalism in Latin America. So I think, yes, I think this is the key for us to strengthen our alliance, to strengthen our solidarity. And this is the work that I think we are just needed. And this is what we will fill the gap and the vacuum that's existing in the transnational movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fahima. Yeah, no, for emphasizing those examples of really powerful transnational solidarity with the Bloom Network, and then looking ahead in terms of building a hub for this kind of transnational engagement and work together, right? I wanted to ask you next too, Nana. What is your sense in terms of transnational network building, solidarity, and collective action, how it can support us to addressing these roadblocks we face in terms of achieving our sort of feminist visions? I wonder what you think.
I guess it supports us in continuing to break the silos, right, in our collective agenda, and then we can also through it like address competition for resources and access to it, and we use it, and I think this would answer the question that was posed on the Q&A box. It also, through realizing the needed long investment in movements and activism, and we understand that, like, 1 year project funding, we all know it's not something that gets us, where we want to go. Like, and we have to look at how activists and unregistered groups want to continue to do the work, but like they lack resources, and like how through transnational network building we can provide the system for that, right? Like we can build the system, and I can give more example like we've done with the research mutual aid funds, and this is how we expand the base of supporting grassroots movements by trying to be grounded in communities, increasing the capacity of the groups to mobilize at the grassroots with resource sharing through research mutual aid funds. And we've done this, for example, with Las Ramonas, to focus on the access to justice for LGBT experiencing gender-based violence. And we base our work in this partnership basically by looking at this GBV hotline in Paraguay, and see how we can provide, as I said, resources and support, and at the same time deepen our own understanding of what are the real challenges at a grassroots level. Just to keep it, short. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. No, and thank you for speaking also in terms of, I mean, these methods and ways of breaking across silos, and also speaking in terms of the question we had from the audience about saying more about how we challenge privileged institutions to disenfranchise and criminalize movements. Thank you. And then lastly, Tine, I was wondering if you could speak to this question in terms of how transnational network building, solidarity, and collective action can support us to address these roadblocks we face to achieving our transformative visions.
Well, I guess we should really come together to work on clear, as Nana said, clear messages of what we want, the alternate, our visions, what needs to change, to develop language that will break those silos, and that is also related to how we share experiences and lessons, how we identify the commonalities by conducting common campaigns. And of course, we need wins. No? We need wins. We need to win in campaigns. I mean, the campaign in Mexico to decriminalize abortion is something that is inspiring, to those of us in the Southeast Asian region. Those wins, we take those wins, and we build those wins. So a transnational campaign where we can, have those common campaigns and win them will certainly spur a lot of efforts on the ground. At the same time, collective engagements with duty bearers, whether these are in the UN or the intergovernmental spaces, I think that is a very crucial element, in building a transnational movement. And of course, transnational movement building is informed by how we look at intergenerational analysis, the need, for example, to also work with women journalists is an important thing in putting our message across and in deepening the conversations and the narratives that are out there, as well as funders. I think the building of an ecosystem, whether we call it an alternative ecosystem that can counter or that can stand authoritarianism and fundamentalisms, is indeed very important right now. And that means that we need to, it's building the ground up, and that's what it's important. Resilient movements that continue to grow anywhere else in the world.
Thank you so much, Tine, for rounding us up there. I mean, in terms of speaking about the need for wins, working collectively to gain these wins, and about us together building an alternative ecosystem to counter fundamentalisms and fascisms. I wanted to thank everyone so much. A huge thank to our panelists and participants and to the EDGE conference conveners for joining us today and for staying on a couple minutes past the hour. Really appreciate your time. I so much appreciate, yes, absolutely, looking at the resources in the chat and the questions and engagement from you. And just to round off by saying, as we've seen, so feminists are at the forefront of this battle and this fight in radically reimagining our world, right? I've really enjoyed this rich conversation, the first of many, on how feminists confronting the far right can work collectively to obstruct the rising rights agendas and advance our visions. Thinking about what a global feminist anti-fascist front could look like in terms of what we're talking about in terms of collective action and wins. And together with you all, really looking forward towards building and strengthening cross-movement alliances in order to build our power for transformative change. So thank you again to the panelists and to you all, and looking forward to next steps together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, bye.